So we move on to the Elite Eight. And in the Elite Eight, Alabama will be facing Duke. Arizona tried to put up their best fight. Duke had a pretty solid lead. Arizona comes storming back with Caleb Love, Jaden Bradley. Unfortunately, a little too late. And Duke ends up winning the game and makes the Elite Eight. First and foremost, when you talk about this Duke team, you have to talk about Cooper Flagg, the potential National Player of the Year. Most people would argue it's either going to be Cooper Flagg or it's going to be Janai Broome. For my money, it's probably Cooper Flagg just because of what he's doing with the attention that he gets and the fact that he's a freshman. I think that all that added together, I think that he is been a little bit more dominant, especially in the tournament. And when you look at a guy who's the Player of the Year, the tournament matters, right? Showing up at the biggest stage at the biggest moment matters. Cooper Flagg has 30 points in their win over Arizona and, just wills them to victory in certain moments in the game. He does a really, really good job handling the ball. He does a really good job on the rebounds. He does a really good job getting to his spots, hitting his shots. He hits a buzzer beater 3 to end the half. That's something he's worked on a ton, is his 3-point shot. And he is going to be a matchup for Alabama that's going to be a little difficult. I think that Alabama has the right size bodies and the right type of guys to defend him. From the starters, I would think that we probably, and I asked in our Discord about this, I think that we probably are going to throw Grant at him. I think it's really the only starter that makes sense to throw at him. I would kind of expect that Nate is maybe a little quick with the subs. I don't think we change our starters, but I would not be surprised if Nate's a little quick with the subs to either get a guy like Jaron or Darion or Mo in to potentially guard Cooper Flagg, depending upon how it works out early on. Obviously, the lineup that we typically run out there, having the 3 guards, gets the ball moving and is much better on our offense. And generally, for most guys, Chris is physical enough to guard their 3. I just don't know that for the way that Duke's team is set up, I don't know that it makes the most sense because when you're looking at this Duke team, Cooper Flagg plays the 4 for them. I think that Chris Youngblood, for example, could guard Con Knipple, but I do not think that Chris would be able to guard a guy like Cooper Flagg. I think you're going to have Grant on him. And with Grant's potential knee issue, if that kind of flares up or if he's, hobbled at any amount, right? Because Grant talked about, hey, I'm only 90%, but as Nate had mentioned, Grant has only been about 90% all, a huge percentage of the season. So that's about as good as he's been all year. Obviously, Alabama's big win gets us some extra rest, which is something that Duke did not get due to the fact that their Arizona game went down to the wire. So that is something that Alabama is going to be bringing in. Obviously, we also played the early game, so we do have a few extra hours of a head start on Duke from that standpoint. So this is something where I would expect that Alabama just tries to throw bodies at Cooper Flagg. Obviously, as we've seen most of the year, even when you're talking about a guy like Janai Broome that plays much more in the paint, we have not done a lot of doubling, right? I would not expect Alabama to try to double. I would expect Alabama to match him straight up. I would think that Alabama has a few different bodies and tries to rotate fresh bodies in on him. Again, I think it's some combination of guys like Grant Nelson, Jaron Stevenson, Darion Reed, Mohamed Diabate. I think those are the kind of guys that you're going to see. I would expect maybe a little bit more out of Darion this game. I think from a defensive perspective, I think he gives you a little something extra that potentially would be helpful against a guy like Cooper Flagg. Additionally, Mo Diabate, I think both of those guys are going to have big games against a guy like Cooper Flagg. Just what he gives Duke is a lot, right? He's an elite player, and he is the guy that you have to circle when you're playing this Duke team. The other thing you have to look at when you're looking at Duke, and I have their KenPom page pulled up, they're the number 1 efficiency offense and the number 5 efficiency defense. This is one of the best well-rounded teams in the entire country. That being said, they have lost a couple of games this year. They have not lost since February the 8th when they lost to Clemson. But, I say this to say that this Duke team is not unbeatable, right? They lost to Duke. or sorry, they lost to Clemson, they lost to Kansas, and they lost to Kentucky, right? I do think that when I look at their different games, Duke has not had a lot of games where the pace gets up a ton. The highest pace game they've had the entire season was 75 possessions, and it was that Kentucky game they ended up losing. I think that is maybe a spot that Alabama could have a little bit of success because Duke generally has done a good job grinding teams out with the defense, right? When you look at their KenPom page, if you're familiar with KenPom, the things that jump out at you are the bright reds or the dark blues. The dark blue on Duke's page is their average possession length on defense, right? So their defense does a good job grinding you to a halt. They average almost 20 seconds per possession on defense, and that's something that I would fully expect Alabama to try to do, right? Similar to what we saw in that St. Mary's game, rebound the basketball and get out and run, right? If you can get the defensive rebound, get out and run. If you can get the offensive rebound, kick it out. This is something where I do think that Alabama will be able to have some success potentially in that pace game. I do know that Duke has the athletes to be able to run with us, but I do think that Alabama is just different when you're talking about a pace thing. We talked about it with St. Mary's. We talked about it against Kentucky. We've talked about it all season, right? Alabama's pace is something that most teams are just not used to seeing at the level and at the competency that it currently is at. Another thing that I've noticed when I look at this Duke team that kind of surprises me is Duke does not run teams off the three-point line particularly well. I'm not going to say they're nearly as bad as BYU at this, right? I pointed out that BYU stat. BYU was around 340th in the entire country. That was a stat that just kind of jumped out at you. When you're playing Alabama, you expect a team to kind of try to run you off the three-point line a little more. Duke is around 150th, right? Around 38% of your opponent's shots are taken from the three-point line. That's not elite, that's not terrible, but that's kind of middle of the road. Again, when you're talking about playing a team like Alabama, that the reason I mention it is that is something to kind of keep an eye on is what is Duke's philosophy on, hard closeouts, etc., to keep us off the three-point line. I would suspect, especially post this BYU game and fresh on their mind of a lot of three-pointers, that they may try to run us off the three-point line. So if that is the case, then you need really good games out of Grant Nelson. You need a really good game out of Cliff Omori. You need really good games out of guys like Mohamed Diabate, or if Aiden Sherrill plays, or whoever you have in the interior. You need some really strong, really physical games. You need LeBaron going up strong with the basketball, right? This is not going to be a game where Alabama takes 53s. I feel fairly confident in saying that. Alabama's probably not going to take 43s. Depending upon how Duke closes out, it would not even shock me if Alabama takes less than 33s, right? This is a game that is much more similar to what Alabama has played the rest of the season in the SEC, right? Nate has talked about that 8-game stretch to close the season, and hey, you're not going to play another stretch like that. Those games prepared you for a game like this, right? Game in, game out in the SEC, wins, losses, what you learned prepared you for this game, right? That's why you schedule the games in the non-conference you schedule. That's why you play in the SEC. That's why you do what you do, right? The reason you built this roster is to play a game like this, right? So first and foremost, I think that the thing that, you have to look forward to is I think that Alabama will be ready for this game, right? A lot of people kind of clowned Alabama for how they started against Robert Morris. And some people didn't even particularly love what happened in the St. Mary's game, albeit I disagree with that one. I think after this BYU game, people understand that Alabama is here to play and here to be legitimate. The question becomes, can Alabama win this basketball game? I'm firmly of the mindset, not even, and I'm not saying, if Alabama makes 25 threes. That's, of course, if Alabama makes 25 threes, they're not losing to anybody. That's a very obvious statement. However, I wouldn't even go that far. I think that if Alabama plays the brand of basketball that they're capable of and rebounds the basketball to the level that they're capable of and plays within themselves and does what this team was built to do, I think that Alabama can beat Duke. I think that the reason you build a team like Alabama built in the offseason, the reason you go get a Cliff Omori, the reason you get a guy like Chris Youngblood, the reason you get the transfers you get, the reason you bring in the freshmen you bring in is to play a game like this, right? Nate has talked about the standard is getting to the Final Four, right? We understand what's on the line. We have some guys on the team that made it last season. And I think that the thing that has me, at least reasonably confident in this team, I will say I think that Alabama can win this game, but it's going to be a very close game. The thing that has me feeling a little more confident is actually like that most people look at Duke as this unbeatable team. People look at Duke as, oh, they've got the National Player of the Year, and it's, oh, Duke this and Duke that. And they, saw some stat earlier that they're 10-0 in that building. They're in New Jersey in the Prudential Center. Alabama's never beaten Duke. They're 0-7 in all time against Duke. I think those are the kind of things that I think will help fuel this team, right? When you've seen Nate Oates, say some similar to last season, right? He used the fuel of you're not good enough on defense to help fuel the defense last season. I think Nate does a really good job motivating his team, and I think he does it within reason to where he doesn't have his team playing tight. I do not expect Alabama to play tight in this game. I think Alabama is going to play like a team that knows what's at stake and that's been here before. And I think that that's something that you couldn't fully say last season because obviously this was our first Elite Eight in many years. And so now this is a back-to-back with plenty of guys that were there. I think that you have some senior leadership that you can rely on of, hey, this is what we did last season. This is how we, obviously we've prepared to this level. This is how we are going to play basketball, and let's go out and show them what we prepared for, right? At the end of the day, my mindset is the reason you built this team is to play with a team like Duke, to play with a team like Auburn, to play with a team like Florida. These number one seeds, you built the team that you built in the offseason, and you played the schedule you played to prepare you for this type of game. So I have no reason to believe, especially when Alabama is playing at the level that they're currently playing at, I have no reason to believe that Alabama is not capable of winning this game. Now, call me a homer, call me whatever you want, but because of that, I am going to predict Alabama to win this game. There's just something about it that I do think that everyone nonstop talking about Cooper Flagg, everyone nonstop talking about, oh, Duke, has the crash course and Duke may be the best team in the country, best team that we've seen in a while. They're setting records in KenPom. They have this historic offense. They're so much better than everyone else in the net rating per KenPom and this and that. And I think that those things are going to be used as fuel to help feed this team as hey, nobody thinks you're capable of winning this game. And even though Alabama just put up 113 points, I think Alabama's going to play with an underdog mentality because they are going to be the underdog in this game. Simply put, they're going to be the underdog in this game. And because they're going to be the underdog in this game, I think that Alabama is going to play like it. And because of that, I think that Alabama comes out, and I think Alabama wins this game. I think it's going to be a very close game. I think that Alabama absolutely can win it, but it is going to be a very, very close game. I said that I was going to look up the time. I just looked it up. The time for the Alabama-Duke game is a 7:49 tip. So 7:49 tip on Saturday evening, so it's going to be a night game. So just a heads up, that is what time the Alabama-Duke game is going to be. As I said, I do think that Alabama wins this game. I think it is very, very, very close. I think that Alabama is going to try to get that possession number to that 74, 75 range, like I talked about earlier, similar to what Kentucky was able to get that range to. My thoughts in this game is Alabama is going to, again, throw bodies at Cooper Flagg and play your offense, play your style, but first and foremost, you have to defend. Similar to BYU, Duke has shooters all over the floor, and you cannot leave them open. So Alabama just has to defend what they're capable of. Alabama has to throw bodies at Cooper Flagg, and Alabama has to prove, hey, we built this team to make it in March, and here's what we're going to do. So I think that Alabama wins. I think my prediction for this one is going to be 87 to 84. I think I'm going to go Alabama 87, Duke 84. Like I said, I do think that Alabama is capable of winning this game, but obviously Duke is an incredible team, and I think that this will be a very, very, very good basketball game. So that's what I have to say. I will be watching. I think I'm going to watch the game at Heat Pizza Bar again. So if you are in Tuscaloosa and you're interested in watching the game with me, come on down to Heat. I'll be watching the game there. Thank you so much for everyone for watching. I really appreciate all the support on these episodes. I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.